first, Jackie, I thought I'd explain just in as short as I can what this lawsuit's all about.
Yes.
And the best verbiage I found says the lawsuit claims a requirement for sellers to make blanket universal offers of compensation to buyer's brokers when a home is placed for sale on a multiple listing service violates the law, in particular the Sherman Antitrust Act. The plaintiffs said the system pressures sellers to offer high commissions to bring in buyer brokers. So there's a huge class action lawsuit saying that this is costing the sellers billions of dollars, and they want the practice to stop. Now, we can debate for hours here whether that's good or that's bad and what's wrong about the suit and everything. But I thought with your knowledge in the business and your experience, you could kind of tell us like what was agency like in the 90s. Okay. And then, what usually happens commissions when prices go up, prices go down, and disclosures, and then talk about buyer agency versus buyer commissions and the garbage headlines. I like that topic. So let's roll the Wayback Machine. What, right
Way
now
back.
we offer, we offer a buyer's agent commission so that they can get compensated for bringing buyers to the listing. How did it used to be?
So it's always been that way, but here's the big difference. So I originally got my license in 1989. And one of the things I wanted to say too is that when I first started in the business, I was in Chicago and we actually didn't even have MLS. So it was like a good old boys kind of scenario where brokers would call each other to say, hey, I've got this and I'm looking for this. So it was way, way different. But what people didn't understand, and especially buyers back then, is that, there would be a typical commission offered, whatever that amount was. But what buyers didn't realize is, they would call on a house, or they would, find an agent through the newspaper or however they connected with a buyer's agent. And I can't even really say buyer's agent. I can only say agent because there were no buyer's agents back then. But they would connect with a buyer. And just like now, that agent would gather all the necessary information. The buyer would share all their personal information. They would hopefully connect them with the lender. They would start looking at homes. They had a very tight relationship. And the biggest thing, they would go look at houses. They'd find a house. The buyer might say, let's say the house was back then priced at $85,000 because that was not unrealistic. So let's say the house was priced at $85,000 and the buyer would tell the agent, hey, I want to offer $75,000, but I'll pay $80,000 if I need to. Well, what they didn't even understand back then is every single agent represented the seller. And there was no buyer agency whatsoever. And I believe it was in the early 1990s. And there ended up being a lot of lawsuits over that because there was so much confusion. Of course, the consumer assumed they're working with an agent, that agent was looking out for their best interest and going to get them the best deal. But in all reality, the buyer's agent or the agent didn't work for the buyer. They worked for the seller, who they never met. They knew nothing about the seller. The first time the agent would meet the seller is because back then we used to go meet with the seller and the other agent to present our offer. But there was no buyer agency. And so there was a lot of confusions, but every consumer assumed that they were being represented by that agent. And so they freely shared all the information. And agents didn't even think or know to tell them, hey, I'm working for the seller.
Well, and you just kind of fast forward a little bit to today that if you tell me that same thing, the house is 85, I want to offer them, would you say 70, but I'll go up as high as 75.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not allowed to disclose that to anybody. But back
Right.
then, you could be loose lips all day, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you were sitting at the table and said, hey, I've got an offer here, it said 70, but this buyer will pay 75. So let's get this put together.
Yep.
And there was nothing wrong with that. Now, a lot of agents, they didn't do that. They tried to represent the client. And there was like an assumed representation, which caused a lot of issues.
But even then, who paid the actual commission to the buyer's agent?
Well, there was no buyer's agent. The seller. The
Just
seller paid. It was
just an agent.
sub-agency back then. So the
So,
seller's agent paid the listing agent, and the agent that brought the buyer was a sub agent working for the seller.
oh, okay. So what changed? Why did they change it?
There was a lot of lawsuits and a lot of confusion because buyers assumed and they shared all their personal information and they shared their intentions, and buyers had no idea back then. They were completely on their own. They had no representation throughout the whole process. And you know how many things can happen through the entire process where you've got to fight for your buyer. Well, there wasn't. Everybody worked for the seller.
Yeah, and back before there was a MLS, way back when there were horses and buggies, real estate agents would just meet at the local watering hole or coffee shop and go, "What do you got?" "Well, I've got this farm down on Johnson Street, and I've got this barn for sale over on Victoria Street. What do you got?" And they would share the information, and they agreed over time that they would form an association, the multiple listing service, so that that information would be accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and that's the way our multiple listing service is now. What you see on there, it has to be accurate. If you say 4 bedrooms and it's 5 and you're wrong, you can get fined, and
Mm-hmm.
the square footage has to be correct. The price has to be correct. Now,
Well, even that was back different there.
well, not everybody not every country does that.
Well, but even the MLS was different back then. So, like I said, when I first started in Chicago, which the National Association of Realtors, I believe that's where they've always been based. Chicago itself did not have an MLS, and you had an option back then of whether you joined MLS or not. And then, wind back and think about it. We had MLS books, and those books came out even for Phoenix. So funny, I still have an order form for the books. I've kept it all these years. So when I first started, some agents used the computer, but some agents still use the MLS book. But the MLS book would come out every 2 weeks, and there was 4 versions of it for Phoenix. So you had the Northwest, Southwest, Southeast, Northeast, and whatever association you belong to, you paid for that book. So if I'm in the Northwest Valley and got clients wanting to look in the Southeast Valley, I've either got to pay for another book or I've got to reach out to an agent down there to get their help because I don't have access to their MLS listings. It's not in my book. And it was every 2 weeks. So, imagine trying to work off a book that came out every 2 weeks now.
I can't even imagine. Neither can
Yeah.
a consumer. So right now, let's talk about how it works for just a brief moment. Right now, when you list your home, you negotiate a commission with the agent. Now, we use the term seller agent and buyer agent because it depends on the transaction, but there really isn't. You don't go to real estate school and say, "I'm going to be a buyer agent," or "I'm only going to be a seller agent." So both can do both. You're considered a buyer agent if you're representing a buyer, and you're a seller agent if you've taken on a listing. So there aren't these buckets that people choose to be in. But if you're representing a seller, you typically show the seller, "Here's my fee to list." And I'll just use anywhere from 2.5% to 3% because that's kind of been where it's at. Some charge 1, some charge a flat fee. And then you say, now, and here's where the lawsuit comes in. We need to offer a commission for the buyer's agent. Let's just say that's going to be about 2.5%. And so now when the buyer's agent sees your home on the MLS and they come in and they show it, they get paid from the proceeds from the seller's proceeds, correct?
Yes.
So the lawsuit is, "Hey, why am I the seller paying for it?" The counter to that is, well, you are and you aren't, because you set the price for the house, which takes into consideration that you're going to have to pay a commission to the buying agent and you're going to have to pay a commission to the selling agent. Guess who finances that whole thing?
The
The
buyer.
buyer. So the buyer isn't getting off scot-free. They're just paying it differently. So the lawsuit now says, I want buyer's agents to figure out a way to pay their own commissions and leave me alone as a seller. So I want to list my house, and how much do I want to compensate for them? Nothing. If you want to get an agent to represent you, you pay for it. So that's where we're at today. But what are agents saying? What do you,
Well, I
as
think that's,
the buzz?
yeah. But when you say what are agents saying, so I kind of want to go back to what I think part of the problem is, and that has to do with what agents are saying. So when I started in the business, I was trained completely different on what to say to a seller. So I don't say to a seller, and I still to this day, when I take a property and list it, I don't say to the seller, I'm going to charge you 3% and we're going to offer the buyer's agent 3%. From the get-go, I was trained back in the day that this is what I charge. So I meet with you, I say, you ask me, what do I charge to list your property? I say 6%. Back then I'd say 7%. And then I say, out of my commission, I am going to offer, because it's my commission that I'm charging. The problem is that agents say it's the buyer's commission. But the right way to say it is say, I'm going to offer out of my commission, because if I sell that house myself, that's my commission. If I want to take that commission and offer it to a buyer's agent to bring activity to the listing, that's my commission that I'm charging the seller. Now, agents say, unfortunately, which has created part of the problem, is that I'm going to charge you this, and then we should offer the buyer's agent this amount because that's what the norm is. And that has created, and that is what's the problem with the antitrust, in my
Yep. And
opinion.
then there's been some training too that says, what do you tell a seller if they don't want to pay a buyer's commission? And the training, which is kind of the smoking gun in this, says, well, you tell them that they have to be competitive. And the National Association of Realtors has required that if you put a listing on the MLS, you have to offer compensation. You can offer $1. So
Hmm.
you're just required to offer compensation. They don't tell you how much, but a lot of people don't know that they can wiggle that number around.
Right. But if
And
agents
so,
had been taught from the beginning the right way to do it, I don't think half these problems would come into play. The second part of that is how buyers present it. There are so many buyers agents out there that will say, don't worry, because clients will ask, what do you charge? Clients need representation, and a lot of them know that. And they will ask, I still get asked all the time, what do you charge?
yeah.
Unfortunately, and agents are trained this way out of brokers, and some of those brokers are part of this lawsuit, and that's why. Don't worry, I work for free. I don't. I'm sorry. Don't worry, I'm not going to charge you. My services are basically free to you. That's wrong.
Yeah. And I was trained the same way. The seller pays everything. My services are free. Sweet. Well, except for you finance it over 30 years. So there hasn't been a lot of disclosure on how these commissions are actually paid. And that's where the lawsuits are coming from. And a couple big ones. What are some of the settlements we've seen out there so far?
So 84 million, 83 million and change by Anywhere, which is formerly Realogy, which is a lot of the big brokerages. I'm part of that, Century 21, Coldwell Banker, Cochrane, Berkshire Hathaway, and then Remax just recently settled. I believe that was 55 million. And I think they were smart to settle. And I honestly, I think there's other reasons why NAR isn't settling. And I don't think they all have to do with the lawsuit itself.
Well, let's explain what NAR is.
Okay. So
National Association of Realtors. What do they do?
take our money.
They do. They're a lobbying group for us.
They
And
market for us. They charge us an ungodly amount to put out silly advertisements. They're probably, in my opinion, I think they're a monopoly. I think NAR needs a big overhaul, and they need a big overhaul. They've got a lot of issues going on, not just this lawsuit. So when you get your license, so people understand, when you get your license and you're going to go to work for a brokerage, and a brokerage, this is a requirement, because if the broker belongs to MLS and the association, every agent they bring on has to belong to the association. You don't have a choice. So there
right.
are brokerages out there that are referral based brokerages that you do have a choice, but your broker that is their number one requirement. And the first thing you have to do is you have to go join your local association. So whether that be We Serve or what, Scottsdale or wherever you are, and then you have to join your state association, and then you have to join your national association, and then you're granted the access to MLS. But if you don't join all of those, you can't have MLS.
And without access, you're worthless.
Right.
So let's say that this huge class action lawsuit, the plaintiffs, and I saw some numbers the other day that like the 85 million that you shared with me, the
84.
attorneys get 25%. There are so many people in that class action lawsuit. By the time the payments get out individually, it's $160 each.
Oh, yeah. I thought it was 187, something like
Oh, it
that.
could have
So,
been.
I
Yeah,
mean,
somewhere around
it's
ridiculous.
ridiculous. It's all about the attorneys, and they got good attorneys. I mean, these are the top attorneys doing this.
Well, let's say
And
the plaintiffs win, Jackie. So the trial's supposed to start October 16th. From what I'm
Mhm.
reading, NAR's digging their heels in. Some of these other brokerages are trying to settle. And even though they've settled, they haven't released the terms of what the settlement is.
Well, because the settlements haven't been accepted yet. So that's why they can't release the terms to the settlement, because until they've offered, this is what we've offered. And I've even talked to our broker, and our broker's like, he doesn't know anything about it. He has no clue. This has been going on for like 5, 6, 7 years, by the way. It's just
Yes.
finally all coming to a head. And I think a lot of the big brokerages, they are fearful of the attorneys. I think there's some really good changes that are going to come out of this. I think there's some necessary changes that are going to come out of this that I personally don't have an issue with. I think it's the way it should be. But they're just trying to keep that dollar amount down and the publicity down, because as this has progressed, nobody knew anything about this as far as consumers 9 months ago.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the dates got set and this got serious. And that's why there's a lot of brokerages that think NAR should settle, because if they don't, it's going to bring an excessive amount of attention.
So what do you think's going to change? Let's say the
Disclosure,
plaintiffs
number
win.
one.
Just disclosure. Okay.
Number one, and I think it's needed, and I don't think it should be a problem. I have no issue handing one of my buyers the agent copy of the MLS, and I hand it to him because I want, same thing with any of the solds. If I'm doing a comp, I want them to have all of that knowledge, and I don't have a problem with a buyer's agent knowing, I mean, a buyer knowing what I'm making. Here's the other difference that I think there needs to be change in, which I think is unfair to not just the agents, but to the consumer as well. And I think this is part of the reason of the lawsuit as well, is that I've had my license for 34 years as of last month. An agent goes and gets, and so when I'm working on a transaction, and this isn't bragging, my client is getting the utmost care. You have an agent that just got their license that probably has only done a few rentals, and that because a lot of agents are trained on rentals before they actually get their feet wet. And that same agent is going to make the same amount of money as I do. But what's the representation going to look like? And I'll tell you, I'm heavily a listing agent. I always have been. There are many times that I'm doing the buyer's agent job for them, but I'm not representing the buyer and I'm not looking out for the best interests of the buyer. And so there are a lot of buyers, and I think this has a big part of the lawsuit, that don't get the representation that they should.
Yeah, I've experienced that too, where you get a new agent and I've had a couple where it's gone really well, but one in particular said, Rick, I got to tell you, this is my first transaction. I'm probably going to have a lot of questions. And I always said, okay, well, make sure you're up on your disclosures because there's certain things you should not tell me, but I will
Hmm.
help you to make sure that you don't miss any deadlines. And if you're missing a form, I'll call you and let you know. And, if you have any questions, call me, but you should also call your broker because I can help you with this form, that form, and timing, but you got bigger questions than that. You got to get with your broker. And that's why I like new agents that are on a team because they usually get
Absolutely.
somebody that can help them. So I'm not against new agents. One of the, because everybody's going to be new, but if you're
Yeah.
new and you're on a team and um, and they help you, you're really hungry because it's like your first or second sale ever. You're
I
practically
think,
living at that house. And when I first started out, um, I was trying to get a listing, and the seller asked me how long I've been doing this. And I said less than a year. And he just looked at his shoes. And so I was working for HomeSmart at the time. And you probably know Bobby Leap,
yeah, very
very
well.
experienced, great guy. And I
Yeah.
said, how about if I get our number one agent out of the office and see if he would do this listing with me? So I called Bobby. He goes, yeah, I'll be there tomorrow. What time?
Boy, that's
And so
impressive that you got Bobby's help.
So he came and showed up the listing. The guy was a wealth of knowledge.
Oh,
We
yeah.
start and then he said, Rick, I'm gonna walk you through this whole thing here for you. And he did. And it was, I look at what real estate agents pay for coaching programs, and I'm thinking what Bobby showed me on my first deal was, everybody go, oh, you only got half the commission. It was worth every dime
Oh, yeah.
that I
Oh,
had to
yeah.
give up just to get that listing.
So,
But
Rick, not to interrupt you, I think it should be a requirement. I'm one of those people that I think the entry is too easy, that there's nobody that should get their license and be able to go out and handle a transaction all by themselves right from the get-go. I think there needs to be a period of time that at least 12 months or a certain amount of transactions that they are working either on a team, under a mentor, or like an apprenticeship. Appraisers have to do it. An appraiser can't go get their license and then all of a sudden be appraising properties the next day. I
oh,
think
I agree. Yeah.
it's a disservice to the consumer, and I think a lot of consumers get hurt by that, and that has a big part to do with this lawsuit as well.
Well, if sellers are no longer required, let's say this class action goes through, to offer a buyer's agent commission, you list the house and you go, well, I charge 3% to list or 6% to list. And they want to make sure that in the MLS, it's not offering 2.5 or 3% or 1%. They don't want to offer anything. What does the industry look like? And what do you think changes if that were to transpire?
I don't know particularly that that's going to happen. Now, I will tell you over the last couple years, I remember about 2 years ago, I ran into it for the very first time. Because here's another big issue. It is absolutely unethical, but it happens every single day that a client will set. I see it all the time because, like I said, I'm primarily a listing agent. So I can go in and I can look at my listings and see what the activity is. And when I see an agent hiding a listing, now I typically always try to offer half of what I'm making. So a lot of times I do offer the 3%, and I think agents work very hard for it, and I think they should get it. But here's the problem is that there are agents that will, like, if a listing says 2%, they won't show it. That is the it's unethical. You can get fined for it. You can lose your license for it if you're caught numerous
Well,
times,
let's talk about
but it
hiding.
happens
What is
every
hiding?
single. They can hide the listing.
So
They
if
can
if
hide the listing in MLS.
yeah, so if I put you on a portal and I
Mhm.
send you houses between 400 and 500,000 in this neighborhood, and I put it on an automatic thing, I can get in, go through that list before it's sent out and go, oh, I don't want him to see this. They're only offering 2%. I can hide it.
Yeah, and that
That
is
option needs to go away.
absolutely. That's why I think that there are certain aspects to this lawsuit that I think are absolutely necessary. And that is full disclosure to the buyer's agent. If you're getting a commission, they're going to see it at closing. So why do
This,
people feel
yeah.
like they need to hide it in the first place? That makes absolutely no sense to me. But here's the other thing, and I've heard of it happening to agents. And in fact, when I managed our office, it happened to one of our agents. And I'll tell you what, I went off on the agent for it because I was responsible because I was managing that office. I had a consumer that called and said, there's a listing that I've seen on Zillow numerous times, and your agent doesn't want to show it to me. And they keep telling me that it's not active, that it's been taken off the market. But I keep seeing it on Zillow. Is it active or it's not active? Long story short, the listing was offering, I think at that time, like 2% or something like that. And you weren't seeing a lot of 2%. That agent was trying not to show it to him because it only offered 2%. I was like, if you do that one more time, you are out of here.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of code of ethics. And
It,
but the other thing I don't understand too, and I think I sent the verbiage to you, is that we are not allowed to call the agent and go, "Hey, you're only offering two. How come you're not offering three?" We're not allowed to do that, right?
yeah, but it happens.
It happens. And um, yet NAR here said further, NAR says buyer's agents are free to negotiate compensation with the listing broker that's different from what appears in the MLS. That's not how I understand it.
Hmm.
And so, because
I will tell you, I have been on that side, and so has Ruby, where we've actually called the agent and asked, because I know what our value is, and we work hard on our files, and so but here's the big but: it's not going to stop us from doing the same job for that client as we would do for any other client. We're not going to give less service because it's less commission, even on our listings too. Sometimes there's scenarios where we give a discount on they get the same. They get the professional photos, the drones, the videos, they get everything the same.
well, in the Pacific Northwest, that's the largest independently owned multiple listing service. And a
Hmm.
year and a half ago, they removed the requirement to pay a buyer's agent commission. You don't
Hmm.
have to. You don't even have to offer a dollar. They took it away, and nothing has changed.
Oh, I bet. But do they disclose it? Can the consumer see it?
Yes, it is
Okay,
added, and it's in
that's
there, and
great.
it shows up on Zillow too.
Yeah, that's
So
good.
they once you get in the MLS and it gets into the feed, then
Yeah.
it shows up. So those are the two changes they said. One, we're going to disclose it, and number two, we're not going to require it. Now, if I'm selling my house and everybody else is offering a commission, but I want to dig my heels in and go, I'm not paying a buyer agent commission. Good luck. I think
Yeah.
it's going to
Well,
be hard because I'm Uber drivers don't take you to the movie theater for free. So,
yeah.
there's going to be some wholesale changes, and I'm seeing a lot of agents going, buyer agents are going to be gone. They're going to be toast. I
They're
don't see
two
that.
different things. That's the other thing I keep seeing all over on YouTube and everything else. Buyer agency disappearing. They are two different things. Your compensation and your agency are completely two different things. And that's where part of the problems come in. Now, I don't have an issue. And when buyer agency first came out, and everybody back then, we were taught, go get your buyer broker form signed from the initial, and you can negotiate. They even discussed it back then. You can negotiate a retainer fee, or you can negotiate your commission up front. And there were times that we did that. So let's say, for instance, a listing, and I did it in the past. If you can show your value as an agent, and I think it's going to bring the caliber of our agents up, and I think that's a really good thing. You can do a buyer broker agreement. You can do a retainer fee if you want to that gets applied to it. And there used to be a lot of retainer fees, but you can also do a buyer broker agreement that states, I charge 3.5% commission for my services. Whatever the selling agent is offering as compensation, I will deduct it from that, and you are responsible for the rest of it. Simple.
Yeah, no, hardly
Sorry,
anybody
my boy's
uses it.
home, so if you hear the noise, I apologize.
Oh, no worries. And I think that also retainer fees sometimes are pretty appropriate because you
Yeah,
get a lot of people sometimes if you haven't signed a buyer broker, they want you to show them every house. I had one in Chandler and I kept saying, well, I need you to sign this agreement. So I showed them like 8 homes and they wanted to go out and see another one. And I said, I've got to have an agreement because, we're
hmm,
just driving around just about every weekend and I don't feel like you're committed.
yeah,
And they wouldn't sign it. So I didn't show them any more homes. That's what, because I've been burned.
yeah. Well,
Uh,
people can't seriously expect to have a good job done for them and the person providing that service not to get paid. It makes no sense whatsoever. And one of the things that I've always explained, and I think buyer agents will need to get good at this, explaining their value, walking a client through. This is the process, because a lot of consumers think, with Zillow, I don't need an agent. I can find the house myself and go straight to the listing agent. Yes, you can, but you have no representation. And let me explain the entire process and all of the challenges that could possibly come up so that you understand what you're looking at. And if you
Let's play devil's advocate on that for a moment if we can. I don't go into a car dealership with an agent representing me.
okay.
So I go in and I negotiate directly with the salesman that's there. A lot of people think that's what real estate should be. So what kind of risks are you taking if you want to go directly to that seller's agent and go, look, I'm Rick. I'm a I'm a good negotiator. I I've read several books on real estate. I've sold 5 houses. I don't need buyer representation. In fact, you don't have to pay me anything. So that agent's only going to make 3% work with me, not 6. Um, so what's my risk?
Hmm. Well, so, and I'm glad you brought up the car thing because I've heard that from numerous people. What's the only thing you're negotiating when you're buying a car?
Just the price.
Okay, that's it. So if you negotiate the price, do you got anything else you need to worry about? That's not,
No, not really.
do you need to worry
Accessories.
about, I mean, you should get a warranty or know what your warranty is, right?
Yeah.
Do you need to negotiate anything possibly wrong with that car ahead of time before you drive off the lot?
Yeah. Usually if you hear a clink and a clunk, you want to get $500 off. So
Okay. All right. But hopefully you've got some kind of a warranty when you drive off the lot too, right?
yeah. Okay. So we've talked about buying a car and you negotiate the price, a few repairs, then you're just going to do the paperwork, maybe buy some accessories and off you go. In a house, you have an agent that helps you negotiate the price. And a lot of people think that that's probably the hardest job for an agent when actually that's probably the easiest
Right.
because you're submitting an offer and the offer has to be written correctly because it's a binding contract that everybody signs and then there are counter offers back and forth, and you have several conversations with the agent, and you reach an agreement on price. My buyer only wants to pay this, seller's only willing to go from that. But then after that, to me, is where the job gets difficult, where you have to really follow deadlines. You're coming up on the inspection, and the negotiation for repairs is usually where most deals die. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it's so funny because that is where I see the newer agents also struggle the most, especially staying within those timelines. So, real quick, just so people understand that haven't been through the process, when you go under contract, you're going to have in the boilerplate of the contract, unless you renegotiate a different time frame, the buyer is going to have 10 days to do any kind of inspections whatsoever that they want to get done. Well, somebody's going to have to schedule all those inspections, right? So they need the connections. They also need some guidance sometimes, especially on unique properties. Let's say it's a rural property or something, that has septic tanks and has a well. So you've got to get all of these lined up and get your inspectors out there, do your inspections. And the inspectors, this is one of the issues I see the most happen with newer agents. So the inspector, when they come out to inspect that house, they are going to pick it apart. You are going to know every single little crack and crevy and any receptacle that's not working. There is going to be a huge laundry list. A newer agent sometimes will take that entire thing and be like, I want it all fixed. Well, you're not buying a brand new house unless you are buying a brand new house, but you're not buying a brand new house. And so there's certain things that you want to look at, and you've got to give your client guidance about this throughout the process, because you're right, this is the number one place it can fall apart. So the things you want to majorly look at is electrical, heating, cooling, plumbing, things like that, or if they have septic or whatever. And if you start picking apart all of the tiny little small things, typically what will happen is you see a seller be like so overwhelmed, they just say no to everything. So there's strategically ways that you prepare that request for repairs. And so during that first 10 days, you can get whatever inspections done. The buyer's agent will put the list together and they'll send it off to the listing agent. The listing agent then has 5 days. And this is the other thing too, is their contractual days. And so day one starts the day after the contract is accepted. You get a lot of agents that are confused on that part. And then the response time for the seller is 5 days. And then when the seller responds, the buyer has another chance to respond again. And you've got to stay in all of these timelines. And there are so many times, especially with newer agents, we'll see a Binzer comes in late. Well, what happens if a Binzer is the repair request? So it comes in on day 11. Well, what happens? The buyer
Well,
just accepted the house,
yeah, the buyer just accepted the house. Nothing
right?
came in and bite. And you have to go to them and go, you just accepted the house. Well, you
Yeah.
don't go to them because an agent should never let that happen. But if you were
No,
buying
but it
that
does.
house on your own without an agent and you went to that seller, the seller is probably not watching your timeline because he
Mm-mm.
listed the house. So don't kid yourself. He's there for the seller. If you miss that timeline, he's going to go, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've accepted the house. We're actually not going to fix anything and you're
Right. And
contractually bound.
it's a whole nother negotiation that happens. And so the really good agents that are good negotiators are going to most likely be able to guide the buyer in the right way. Like I said, you can ask for so much that a seller will throw their hands up and say no to everything, or you can strategically ask for the most important things and you have a higher chance of getting them all taken care of.
Well, let me pull out my change machine here for a second and say, what if the industry changes so much that you have the house listed with an agent that represents the seller, but everything else is done concierge? In other words, I'll write your contract for X amount of dollars, and I will get you through escrow for X amount of dollars. And if you want me to help negotiate repairs, that's going to cost you this much. And just for every function that comes along, you do it on a consultation and a fee basis to where you're not charging a commission, you're charging by transaction. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
$500 to negotiate that repairs. And because they're going to get the list, go, I don't know what to do. Well, I can help you with that. But, is it possible that maybe that might surface as an alternative to the quote unquote buyer agent commission?
Honestly, I'm surprised it hasn't already surfaced. So, no matter how this turns out, just because that seed is planted, I absolutely think those type of services may arise. Do I think they're going to be beneficial? Sometimes it might work just fine. But at the same time, this is a very relational, and you need to be a good negotiator to really truly
Well,
give your
let
client the
me
best representation.
let me jump in and tell you something a lot of people don't know. There was a brokerage out of Utah called Homey, and that was
Oh
their
yeah,
business
yeah.
model. That
Yeah.
was exactly what their business model was. If you wanted to list, you listed your home, and then they charged you a fee, and they charged you for the sign, they charged you for the
Oh
lockbox,
yeah.
they charged you to put it on the MLS. You decided what you were going to pay for a commission if you wanted to, but you were responsible for showing the home.
Hmm. There's
And
actually
then,
been a lot of companies like that.
yeah, so they put that model out there, and it didn't fly.
Yeah. So
It
there
did. They had maybe 6 listings in Arizona. It didn't make it because people
there
like, I
was
got to be home. I got to show the home. And the other thing is, if you don't have, um, if you're not offering anything to the buyer's agent, um, as you the listing agent, you're going to have to show the home every time because how are they going to get in? They can't get in
right.
the lockbox because there's no such thing as a buyer agent anymore. Are you going to, can you only handle one listing at a time? Because now you got to be there.
Well, and what's going to happen too, this is a question I've thought about because I have no issue negotiating with a buyer up front what I charge. The example I gave earlier where I could say I charge 3%, whatever is, the seller might be offering, I'll deduct it from that. And you owe the balance. But what do you do as a listing agent if somebody, because you can't not, somebody calls off the house, are you then negotiating a fee from that buyer? You can't.
There,
Now you could do something up front, letting the seller know if I fall in a position that I have to play dual agent. And we have our we handle dual agency, Ruby and I. There's some brokerages that absolutely don't allow it. And I think you can't be a one-man show and offer dual agency either. But could you negotiate with the seller up front that if I'm representing the buyer, or I'm not representing the buyer, but I'm doing this for the buyer, that I'm going to charge an additional amount to you on top of the listing commission I'm charging you,
Yeah,
since
I
there's
think
more
you
work in
can.
it?
I think you can. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we've done it. I've actually discounted that said, now if I get a
Yeah,
sign call and they want me to negotiate, I'll lower my commission and go, why do you want to do that? Well, I answer my own phone calls.
right.
Because that's usually the hardest part of the job is just getting a hold of people,
Hmm.
trying to have a conversation. Now everybody wants you to text. You can call, it goes to voicemail. Voicemail is full, but you text and they get right back to you. So they must be at the bar or something. But I think we're going to watch, the whole industry is watching us closely. And although the trial is supposed to start October 16th, even if the plaintiffs win, I think we can count on a year, maybe two, of the appeal process.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But in the meantime, all these brokerages are going to be changing their business models and trying to get in compliance because they can see the freight train coming. That's why you're seeing these early settlements. But I think for the consumer, we may not see much of a change. And so I think uh, the the bad headlines that you're seeing that you alluded to earlier, well, there will no longer be buyer's agents. It's a bad time to get into real estate because you won't be able to show homes. That's
Well,
nonsense.
that's just the clickbait stuff that some people do. So,
Yep.
and they have nothing. That's why I said it's like I have seen so many headers for shows on that say buyer agency disappearing, buyer agents out of business, and it's like, no, they're not.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
This
Well, if that's what
is-
you think, bye bye.
yeah, I do
Well,
think it
Jackie,
could.
I appreciate you taking the time to come on and explain it, especially giving us the historical perspective and what it means, and all of the antidotes and things that you've dealt with in the industry. Because you first started selling homes when you were 12. Um, so
Just about. Oh, heck, I was playing with, because I don't know if I ever told you, my mom was in the business. She put Queen Creek on the map. She used to have a little Cessna plane, and we would fly from Deer Valley Airport down to Gateway, I believe it's called, and then drive out to Queen Creek. It was all farmland, and this is in the early 70s. She was involved in a lot of the development of Queen Creek, the initial development of it. And then she was also involved in a lot of development of the uptown, downtown Phoenix, when downtown was mostly boarded up. And she had her own brokerage when I was a kid, and a relocation company. I remember I used to play with the contracts behind her desk. And it's well, it was still carbon when I started too. It was like, here, press hard. There's 3 copies of it. I think this could be a good thing for the industry. I really do, because I think the consumer deserves better, and they deserve more. And
yeah,
so I'm
yeah,
hoping to see that. And I don't know. I'm not really fearful of it.
yeah. I like change myself, so bring it on. We'll see what happens. So I'm kind of odd that way, and I have a showing tonight in Queen Creek. So I wish I had a
Oh, cool.
helicopter. Well, Jackie, good to see you again, and thanks for all your help.
Thank you, Rick. It was a
Yep.
pleasure.